Hey DFers! Exclamation point. I find Nintendo's output on Switch excellent, both in quality, volume, and diversity. However, with constant news on how game development is getting more expensive, I'm worried that Switch 2 will receive less games and Nintendo might avoid experiments. Is my worry justifiable? Tools are also progressing, so could Nintendo keep up the production of software at the current level? Because Switch 2 will be a quote unquote generation behind. Oliver?
I am worried about that as well. I am significantly worried about that. And I think Nintendo's output has been slowing as of late. And I think that they probably will slow down in this upcoming generation. But I think Nintendo is in a good position, maybe with respect to some of the other console platform holders, because they do have this tendency of combining AA and AAA games and pitching that to their audience. And the audience tends to be more receptive, right? Like the
Yeah.
typical Nintendo title is not receiving the same $200 million budget that would be often kind of a prerequisite to pitch a game on another console platform. And you have titles like Princess Peach Showtime or like Luigi's Mansion 2, the remake, the revitalization of that title, that are getting mixed in with titles like Metroid Prime 4 and Tears of the Kingdom, which are these bigger budget titles, and the audience seems fairly receptive to that. So I think they're in a position where they can take these concepts and make them work within a lower budget. Maybe the less powerful hardware helps them do that as well. And I think that's a position where they're going to have a relative advantage, but I still think that they will not be delivering games at quite the same pace that we're used to in the next generation. That's my suspicion, unfortunately.
Right. Interesting. John?
I'm not sure it would necessarily affect them too much because I think the thing about Nintendo is the types of art style that they embrace, the types of games they make will look amazing on this new hardware just due to the nature of using a more powerful device.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons the emulators have been so popular for Switch games. I don't think they need to massively overhaul what they're doing on the visual side. I think they would just naturally benefit from higher resolutions, better image quality, and even more consistent performance. I think you take Tears of the Kingdom, you run it at equivalent of like a DLSS 4K 60. I don't think there's anything wrong with those visuals. Those look amazing. And whatever changes they could make to make them look a little bit better, I don't think would massively impact the budget necessarily. Like, I feel like they're still going to be targeting a similar level of visual fidelity on the new machine, and they don't really need to go that much higher than what they've done already. They can just run it better. And they can maybe execute slightly more complex concepts with fewer issues. And it's not like they don't really make the types of games that have been exploding in terms of cost as well. Because like one of the most expensive things in a lot of these games really is making these so open world stuff is expensive. Yes, so Zelda is going to be more expensive and take time, but I don't think that's going to change much. But then stuff like cutscenes and all the cinematic stuff, that stuff's really expensive to make. It takes a long time. Or the games that rely on services and are like massively multiplayer, that stuff also takes a lot of resources to run. Those last two, though, are not really things that Nintendo does all that much. And they don't need to. So I think that just by that virtue, that they should be okay. I think their biggest growing pains was moving to the modern style of graphics rendering with what they did with the Wii U jump. But I think this new Switch can just be a continuation of what they've always done, or what they've been doing on Switch, just with fewer issues.
Right. I mean, if we'd go back to I Like Licorice's point in terms of quality, volume, and diversity, I do think there are some worries here because Switch 2 isn't going to be able to rely on an entire last generation of titles that could be ported across in the way that happened with Switch 1. We got that quality, volume, and diversity, I think, partly because between sort of like the brand new Switch games, you had an entire generation's worth of really excellent Wii U titles that never really found an audience.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, that definitely contributed to quality, volume, and diversity because there was never any issue with the quality and diversity of Wii U titles. It was just there weren't enough consoles out there to justify making them. And suddenly there was with the Switch. And so I'm kind of interested to see how the volume specifically is going to pan out on Switch 2. Switch really was genius on the part of Nintendo for a number of reasons. Obviously, they could have a really rich first-party lineup, 2 generations worth of development really could be deployed. And then it sort of doubled up again because the mobile and the home console divisions essentially merged to create games for a single platform. So yeah, and then of course you had all of the third-party stuff because the hardware was third-party friendly. It was essentially an underpowered, you might argue, but still a modern console architecture. So it was kind of like one might say, a once in a lifetime coming together of all of this stuff that created that quality, volume, and diversity. I'm going to be interested to see how it happens on Switch 2, but I do foresee that there'll be fewer titles. Possibly augmented with Switch 2 upgrades for the Switch 1 games, of course, which Switch 2 would definitely enable. Interested to see how that one works out. But I do think that John's hit the nail on the head in other regards, which is that the nature of the games Nintendo make isn't really sort of married to this kind of quest for absolute fidelity that a lot of game developers have sort of embraced in the last couple of generations specifically. But beyond that, yeah, interested to see what happens.